events of that created a tremendous amount of devastation and destruction to the African American community. As a matter of fact, the entire community, 35 square blocks, was burned to the ground.
She witnessed all of that. She watched a baby being lost who was being carried in a box, a shoe box, and just horrific stories.
Now, by virtue of me saying that the city of Tulsa is racist doesn't mean I'm saying that everybody in Tulsa is racist, right? I'm saying that the system in place is and has been irrevocably racist.
So our kids should not have to travel across town to see a movie. We should not have to travel across town to visit a quality grocery store with fresh fruits and vegetables.
This was, post the Emancipation Proclamation. He's born in the latter portion of the 1800s, and so they knew nothing but work. They knew nothing but trying to move towards something that was going to be better tomorrow than it was on today.
The 100 and 200 blocks of Northeast 2nd Street, known as Deep Deuce later on, or Deep 2, was off limits to African Americans. You could not live there.
Deep Deuce in Oklahoma City and Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, two cities 100 miles apart. Both African American communities faced race relations. Both communities rose and fell under political and racial circumstances. The dividing line reflects the impact of segregation, urban renewal, and racial unrest in Oklahoma.
That's what happens when you concentrate a bunch of people into a small area, and this is back in the time of restriction and where you could live and where you could go and what you could do. So we were like restricted, and all this talent, pressure cooker right there in those two blocks.
Segregation, that's what that was about. It was political. They put a number of laws on the book, and these laws were tested.
Of course, in America, there was segregation, and so the Black pioneers created their own community, and as a result of that, had to rely on one another. And the city, of course, knew that there were many opportunities for Blacks to prevail, but it always stood in the way. So whether we didn't have access, given that there was segregation, we had all these Jim Crow laws that prevented us from moving forward. And it also led to what became the massacre, because you had these city officials who were also part of the KKK, right? It was pure hatred and fear of Black people.
Before the massacre, there were a count of some 200 plus Black-owned businesses here. Into the 30s, that count swelled to over 400. So the community, the resilience and commitment and self-reliance of the community rebuilt itself, bigger and better. And in some instances, you could look at it as a, I told you so kind of deal, regardless of getting no help, that we are of a mindset and a mind and a resiliency to rebuild in spite of all these obstacles and our odds. And so it rebuilt bigger.
The other thing that was really good about 2nd Street was there was such a rich music culture in and around 2nd Street. And Charlie Christian had come from a musical family. All of the people in his family, his mother, his grandmother, his father, his two brothers, they all played instruments of some kind, and most of the time they would play. The only one that didn't play multiple instruments was the grandmother. She played the piano. But they would have jam sessions in their home. And they lived on 1st Street, right behind 2nd Street. But they were known for having these great jam sessions.
Charlie Christian's style of guitar is so well recognized and appreciated because before Charlie Christian opened the style of playing guitar up, most guitar players, especially in big orchestras, they strum the guitar for time. Chum, chum, chum for time. And Count Basie and Duke Ellington and some of the other larger bands, orchestras, that's what they used the guitar for, was keeping time along with the bass player. But Charlie Christian started playing melodic solos on the guitar. And he was so good at it, and the electric guitar at that, and he was so good at it, is that that's when the word got out about, you need to hear this guy, Charlie Christian. So when John Hammond flew in here and he heard him, he called Benny Goodman and said, I think you need to hear this guy. And after he heard him play, and so he ended up joining the orchestra with Benny Goodman and the guys.
By then he had, become very popular on the national scene with the Benny Goodman orchestra. Not only the orchestra, the trio, the quartet, the sextet. He played on Broadway, and everybody was proud of this native son who had done really well.
Walter J. Edwards, the major developer for the houses in Edwards Addition, was the first African American to be able to get the home financing from the federal government for buying houses. In those days, those houses were hugely expensive and were from what would be considered to be the black middle class of Oklahoma City. Those were the houses that teachers lived in, that preachers lived in, that people who worked at Tinker Field lived in, that people who worked at Wilson Packing houses worked in. So those houses did not come cheap, and that's why Walter J. Edwards sought the federal housing program for his houses and got it.
It's estimated that he built over 750 homes during his career. But not only was he a real estate developer or a home builder, he was kind of like a serial entrepreneur. He really made a good deal of money in trading, bartering junk, and owned junkyards here in Oklahoma City. And during the boom and bust cycles that many businesses and industries go through, he made it and lost it and made it again as well. But the really devastation of Greenwood, what caused the demise of Greenwood, was desegregation, urban renewal, and the building of an interstate highway directly through the middle of the business community.
Well, the park represents an effort to make things right in a sense, but it's symbolical to me of what occurred in 1921, of which my grandmother was a survivor, and her picture hangs in the Smithsonian Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C., because she was one of the survivors of the Tulsa race massacre of 1921. But the park itself represents the community's effort to bring us back together. Now, whether or not that's happening still remains to be seen, but at least there is in the heart of some people a willingness to reconcile, to come together, to dialogue, to have a common ground, to be brothers and sisters again. And with all the separation, it is greatly needed.
Well, it's twofold. One is my critique of racial reconciliation, which I think has this innocent reading of history. It's designed almost to make white people comfortable with grappling with the history, right? But the other part is I don't believe that one can have reconciliation if friendly relations weren't created to begin with. Because by definition, reconciliation means restoring friendly relations. So that presupposes that at one point these relations were created. But between blacks and whites in America, I mean, if we start with the transatlantic slave trade, those weren't friendly relations. I don't know about you, but I don't consider a relationship between a slave and a slave master as friendly, right? And then we can move along in the history of America with slavery and segregation, Jim Crow laws, of course, urban renewal, all of these different things. And I've never seen the friendly relations created. But I think we can do so, right? So I talk about conciliation because I believe it's a path to healing, right?
Just imagine growing up and that's all you hear about black people is how they were chained, they were slaves, they were beaten. We used to watch movies in our Black history classes from the Civil Rights era that showed black people being hosed down, being chased by dogs, being beaten by the police. That image was played for us over and over again, when they could have also taught us about our prosperity, about how well educated the community was, about how important education was to our community, about how they took such great pride in how they dressed and how they lived in their homes, about how well they provided for their families and their children, about how they thought about generational wealth, creating a business that they could then leave to their children and grandchildren. And when I give tours, and I've been doing so for 23 years now, when I give tours to young people, and we are able to walk them through the halls of the Greenwood Cultural Center and show them images of African Americans well-dressed, driving cars. Simon Berry was a pilot. He owned his own plane. In 1921, he was making $500 a day with his own plane and a jitney service that our public transportation system that the city of Tulsa operates now, MTTA, they purchased from Simon Berry with the agreement that they would keep their black mechanics and black bus drivers. So when I take them through and I show them these images of how successful we were, how independent we were, how proud of people we were, we loved one another. We loved our community. We loved Thursday nights, which was Maid's Day Off, and we had jazz and blues clubs, and the ladies would spend the day getting their hair done and dressing in their finest apparel, and we would parade up and down Greenwood. And it was like a Juneteenth celebration every Thursday evening. It was a wonderful time. Some of the clubs in downtown Tulsa would bring in people like Nat King Cole and Louis Armstrong to perform. They couldn't eat there, they couldn't stay there, so they would come back to the Greenwood district and stay at the small hotel. And it wasn't unusual to go into a jazz or blues club and see someone like Nat King Cole or Louis Armstrong playing with the local musicians, everyone dancing and having fun and laughing. That's amazing, an amazing part of our history. And when I tell our young people that, you can almost see the light in their eyes. You can see the glimmer of hope. You can see their chest stand out a little bit. They have another point of view. They have another way of looking at their history and who they are and where they come from. So our young people they're always, like all young people, they're looking for someone to admire, someone to look up to. And of course we have entertainers and you have musicians and athletes that they look up to, that they see on TV, but you have someone that was in your bloodline. Many of these children don't know that they're grandparents, and they don't find out sometimes until they come here and they say, that's my grandpa. When they see their picture on the wall, they read the stories and they see the names and they realize that's my family. That was my family that owned a business here, that had a restaurant, had a grocery store, owned a hotel. There's a list of hundreds of businesses on the monument outside, and some of those business owners, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren still reside in this community. And so we have to let our children and grandchildren and future generations know that this is a part of our history. And it's important that they know that, because you can't truly know where you're going until you understand where you've been. And this is where they've been.